Welcome into another episode of the Better Fantasy Football Show. My name is Will. I'm your host today, and I'm super excited to be joined by my good friend Joe Volpe from the fantasy.football.analyst Instagram account, one of the best in the business. Joe, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's up? Long time no see. Really excited to be talking about these players today. Not the teams. Teams are some New York teams. Not a fan of those, but I'm going to put my bias aside so we can keep the focus on the players because this is fantasy. We're talking about fantasy football here. So that's the important thing. But yeah, I'm excited.
Well, you're a good man for being able to put all that aside. And yeah, I mean, look, that's a big part of fantasy. It's kind of being able to look objectively at the players that we're talking about, and so for me, I'm clearly a Giants fan. But you still have to be ready to draft CeeDee Lamb, if he's available. You still have to be ready to draft Tony Pollard. So it's an astute point that you bring up, and I'm glad you brought it up because today we are going to be talking about the Giants and the Jets. I know you're a Patriots fan, so thankfully the Jets haven't been, anything that you've had to worry about for the better part of your life, Joe. Things might be changing now. How are you feeling about the Jets overall going into the year?
Well, I think it's a team on the rise. Obviously, having Aaron Rodgers there, they got some studs on defense now with guys like Sauce Gardner. And if they can get their offense moving, which is really the only missing piece, the Jets are going to be a playoff team. So it's not looking good for the Patriots' perspective of it. But I'll give them a year. And it's funny because I hate the Jets just because they're the Jets, but at the same time, I really there's not players that I hate. A quick story: a long time ago, I went to a Jets open practice, just with a buddy of mine, and we had family passes. We were sitting with all the players and stuff like that. It was super cool. Jamal Adams, my dog starts crying. Jamal Adams took the time to say hi to every single person that was sitting there. He must have stayed at least 30-40 minutes after practice, talking to every single player, signing every autograph, taking every picture.
That's awesome.
And that's, there's things like that where I'm just like, all right, this is just a really cool guy. So just a quick story there. But yeah, I have admiration for the players, just not the team.
Wholly respect that. But we're going to get into all the players today. And what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to have Joe give us his reactions to every player's ADP so we can all have an idea of whether or not we should be targeting these players at their current price or passing on them at their current price. And look, with the Jets specifically, a lot could change potentially with tomorrow's Hall of Fame game. We're recording this on Wednesday, August 2nd. Games tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, football. Dude, football is back. It's official.
Jeez.
It's official. Football is back. I know it's crazy. But let's just preemptively say if we remember last year, Josh Jacobs had some weird playing arrangement in the Hall of Fame game. I think he played in the third quarter. Something weird happened and everybody freaked out. And Josh Jacobs went on to be the league's leading rusher. So let's not overreact too much to whatever happens in Canton, Ohio this week. But let's start right now, Joe, with Breece Hall, right? So Breece Hall, very interesting player, obviously this offseason and in fantasy drafts. Breece Hall is currently going at the end of the second round, early third. Are you buying or are you selling him? Are you drafting or are you passing on that current ADP for Breece Hall?
So when you look at a guy like Breece Hall, you look at the groundwork that's there in terms of a running back coming off a torn ACL, a running back potentially sharing a backfield with Dalvin Cook, and that's all the rage right now is Dalvin Cook. It's getting hot that he's going to sign the New York Jets. So those two things alone are enough for me to deter drafting Breece Hall at the end of the second round. A lot of times these running backs, after they get torn ACLs, they need a buffer year to get back into their routines, get healthy. So a lot of times, that's just something you want to avoid in general. We're not talking Adrian Peterson here, running for however many. What was it, 2K yards he ran after his ACL? I don't remember.
Crazy,
what it was,
yeah,
absolutely crazy. But it's not a situation that I'm looking at and I'm excited about right now for Breece Hall. I think down the line in the future, if Dalvin Cook signs a 1-year deal and then Breece Hall, ends up being the guy next year, I'm all for it. After that buffer year. But and obviously this is all assuming Dalvin Cook signs with the Jets. If he doesn't sign with the Jets, I'm still a little weary of that second or third round price range.
Gotcha. Let me ask you this, Joe, playing a little hypothetical. What if, let's say Dalvin Cook doesn't sign with the Jets, and let's say Breece Hall comes out and he plays, he's practicing in full in training camp. Does that change your opinion on him? Then does the late second round ADP become a drafting situation for you instead of a passing situation?
I think it's closer to it. I think it justifies the price, but I'm still not excited about it. So
Okay.
again, coming off the ACL, even if he's practicing in full, there's still a chance he could tweak something or pull something. A lot of times that's very common after those kind of
Mhm.
injuries. So yeah, I think it would justify that late second, early third round ADP. But I think this year specifically, there's a lot of value in the running back position in later rounds, which is not something that we often see. Like there's guys in the fourth, fifth, sixth round that I'd be fine drafting as my RB2, RB3. So I think it kind of eliminates some of the urgency of drafting a running back early, especially when you look at guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase being drafted first overall in some leagues, second overall. So it looks like the league is kind of, or the fantasy world is kind of shifting more towards wide receivers early, and a lot
Mhm.
of those running backs are kind of falling back a little bit. So yeah, I think as I said, it justifies more so his end of the second round, early third round price, but I still wouldn't be too excited about it.
Gotcha. I think I'm in line with you there, dude. I think the thing that we can't afford to do in the late second, early third round is take a risk that we
Yep.
know is a little too risky for our appetite or whatever. And to your point, we have seen when guys have torn their ACL in the past. Like look at Saquon Barkley a couple of years ago. Look at J.K. Dobbins last year.
Yep.
It's hard to come back from that. And so I think it's a good point. Let's avoid the risk. Let's pass on Breece Hall at the late second round, early third. Let's take someone like T. Higgins instead. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Sure. Yeah. I like T.
Cool.
Higgins, Chris Olave,
Yep.
Amon-Ra St. Brown in that area as well. Guys I also like.
100%. All right, so let's move on to Alan Lazard coming over along with his buddy Aaron Rodgers, currently going in the late 10th, early 11th round. How are you feeling about Alan Lazard there? Are you drafting or are you passing on Alan Lazard at that ADP?
So definitely drafting. Definitely
Okay.
drafting, not because I'm overly excited about what Alan Lazard could do in New York, but more so once you get past the eighth or ninth round, it's free range,
Yeah.
right? Once you get past the eighth, ninth round, you've got your quarterback, you got your tight end, you've got your starting running backs, you got your starting receivers. It's just take whoever you like. So Alan Lazard at the 10th, 11th round, I'm completely fine with. I don't think he's going to kind of produce at a level that's going to be consistent. I think he's going to be kind of boom or bust. I think he'll have some touchdowns here and there. But Garrett Wilson's the guy. And that's kind of just the end of that. It's going to be Garrett Wilson. Lazard's going to be in a supporting role. 10th, 11th round for a guy who has chemistry with Rodgers. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll take that all day.
I love it. Yeah, Alan Lazard's one of those players that, we didn't really think about in Green Bay as being Aaron Rodgers' guy, but it
Yeah.
seems like over the last couple of years, like it's really come to fruition that like, yeah, Alan Lazard is Aaron Rodgers' boy. Like that's who he loves to throw to. He loves having him as a teammate. And so if you think about Rodgers coming into the new situation, him coming in with a familiar friend and somebody
Yeah.
that has chemistry with him on the football field is super important. So I love that you're targeting him and drafting him at that current ADP. Like you said, it's almost a free square at that point. So
Yeah.
I think if you like Alan Lazard, if you like the talent enough, there's a lot of signs pointing to draft him. Okay, so moving on to the aforementioned Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, he's always a topic of hot discussion for one reason or another. But talking about him from a fantasy perspective this year, he's currently going in like Alan Lazard, the 10th round. So are you drafting or are you passing on Aaron Rodgers this year at that current ADP?
I value Aaron Rodgers as kind of a low tier quarterback one, borderline high tier quarterback two in terms of end of that top 12 kind of spot. So uh, it's kind of like a, it's kind of like a, well, I'll call it quarterback purgatory, right? Because you have the top five or six, seven guys who are like the Lamar Jacksons, the Joe Burrows, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, even Trevor Lawrence all fit into that kind of sphere.
Mhm.
You have those guys, and then you have the really late, high upside guys. Anthony Richardson, maybe I consider Kenny Pickett kind of in that realm as well. There's some other guys who like rookies like Bryce Young. If he really takes off, he could be a value pick at that point. Kirk Cousins. Those are the kind of like, all right, late round, you need a high upside guy. Sure, why not? Then Aaron Rodgers is kind of in the middle of like a Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers, of like, all right, I might need a solid starter. I don't expect him to be this elite QB1, but he'll be a solid option. So it's kind of like a purgatory spot where, like, if I'm picking late for quarterback, I want someone with high upside. I want Anthony Richardson. I want a guy who could be a top five quarterback. And otherwise, I'm just going to take the guaranteed top 5 quarterback with Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, or that. So it's a weird spot to draft him, but he does pair nicely with a guy like Anthony Richardson. So if I want to take Aaron Rodgers, then I get Anthony Richardson round 14. I got a solid quarterback 1, and then I could trade him and then bounce to Anthony Richardson if he starts playing well. So long story short, yeah, I'll draft him in round 10, but my preferred route would be drafting one of the elite quarterbacks early or high upside quarterbacks late.
I love that. And I think that's the first time I've heard that strategy, Joe, of taking both. Like, say you're picking out of the 12 hole, right? Drafting both Anthony Richardson and Aaron Rodgers back to back. I think that's a really smart thing to do because last year the quarterbacks that could run the football like broke the league. Like we saw Justin Fields, who displayed very poor throwing skills as a passer, break fantasy football just because he has this crazy rushing upside each week. And so Anthony Richardson definitely has that. Obviously, he's a guy that we would be excited to draft. And if you compare him with somebody like Aaron Rodgers, who you're projecting to be a solid, weekly play, I think that's a really smart thing to do. And I'm super glad you mentioned it. So Aaron Rodgers, just to clarify, you're drafting him, but you'd rather take one of these other guys.
Yeah, and again, like when you look at your draft, week 3 of the fantasy football season, you're gonna kiss goodbye your 14th round pick, your 13th round pick, maybe your 10th or 11th round pick. Like a lot of these picks can be indispensable. You're obviously shooting for upside, so why not shoot for upside at the quarterback position? Which again, I know the value is kind of neither here nor there. Nobody's taking quarterback in round 1, or at least they shouldn't in a 1 QB league. But at the same time, upside is upside, right? If Anthony Richard balls out, he's a top 3, top 5 running back, there's value to having that on your bench. So why not?
100%. All right, man. Well, let's get to the number 1 player that Aaron Rodgers is going to be throwing to, hypothetically, as we project. Garrett Wilson, currently going in the middle of the second round, dude. Are you drafting or are you passing on Garrett Wilson there in the middle of the second round?
I am drafting today, tomorrow, yesterday, all day. I made a huge post about Garrett Wilson a little while ago, dug into some numbers, so I'll read some of that as I will. So one of the best things I found about Garrett Wilson is he's going into year 2, right? So year 2, typical breakout for wide receivers. He saw the 6th most targets for all receivers last year and hit over 1,100 yards as a rookie. Now, when you break down his success rates, and this comes from good friend Matt Harmon at Reception Perception, he had a 74.5% success rate against man coverage, a 79.4% success rate against zone, and a 81.2% success rate against press coverage. He's got a major quarterback upgrade. Now, the reason the success rates are so important, that 81.2% success rate against press coverage, the only other rookie wide receivers to do that, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, and CeeDee Lamb. That's a lot of names, but those are a lot of good names, especially as rookies to look out for. So he's in very good company in terms of what he was able to do as a rookie. I honestly think I can't find a reason that he wouldn't be a top 5 wide receiver other than if other guys are just better for him. But I would argue Garrett Wilson at the end of the first round. I know it's kind of just, again, you're shooting on upside, but I think any quarterback position, even if Rodgers doesn't play like the Rodgers that we know and love, it's still a huge upgrade compared to what he was working with Zach Wilson, who could not complete a pass down the field. So Mike White last year made Garrett Wilson a top 5 wide receiver at times. So I have zero problem taking Garrett Wilson at the beginning of that second round.
Well, as somebody who just traded for Garrett Wilson in Dynasty, that makes me really happy to hear that, man. That stat from Harmon is just incredible. Like the group of guys that he's in, and Matt's charting every single route. Like he's in the weeds on this stuff. And so for him to be able to say that these numbers are comparable to guys like Jefferson, Chase, Odell, CD, Michael Thomas, that's really all you need to know. Like there's not really much else to go into. I think from a talent perspective, I think the reason that he might be, an interesting inflection point there in the second round is just because of the guys that he's going around, like we've seen CD do it before, we've seen Some of these other guys like Nick Chubb's going in the second round. So that's I think where the discussion gets a little bit more interesting is like, are you taking him over these guys? And so let me ask you that. Let's just play a little of this or that real quick. CD Lamb or Garrett Wilson?
Garrett Wilson.
Garrett Wilson or Nick Chubb?
If they're both available, I don't know. Again, as I mentioned, it seems like the latter is kind of leaning towards the wide receivers early. So on that route, I'd probably go Garrett Wilson if I know I can get some running backs later.
Okay. Garrett Wilson or Saquon Barkley?
I'll take Saquon.
Okay. So I think we found kind of where that point is. So, but super interesting to hear that you have Garrett Wilson ranked over CD Lamb this year. That's incredible, dude. I love that. I mean, look, I'm all in on Garrett Wilson. Like I said, I traded for him. I've been picking him up everywhere. He's just definitely probably the most interesting player, I think, on the Jets from a draft perspective this year. So we'll see. Sure. All we can do is see how the games play out, but super, super exciting to hear your ringing endorsement of him. Let's move on to some of the undrafted players that are currently not being drafted in fantasy drafts, but could still be interesting for us this year. Let's talk quickly about Corey Davis. So is he somebody that you're stashing on any lineups, or are you avoiding Corey Davis?
I will fold on Corey Davis, and I will raise you a McCole Hardman. So McCole Hardman has been getting some good praise from Aaron Rodgers. If he stays healthy, I think he could potentially start in the slot for this team. I imagine you're going to have Garrett Wilson kind of playing that X role. You're going to have Alan Lazard on the outside for sure. Corey Davis seemed to be their guy in the slot, but he's kind of been slipping a little bit. It wouldn't shock me if Corey Davis didn't make the final roster, or if he was just released for cap purposes, traded, whatever the case may be. I think once the Jets acquired Alan Lazard and they still had Elijah Moore, everybody was like, all right. And they signed McCole Hardman. Corey Davis is gone. That's it. He's done. He's not going to be on the team anymore. So the fact that he's still on the roster, a little shocking to me. But I'd imagine that, once they do those roster cuts, there's a chance he doesn't remain on the team. So if you're going to take a deep shot on another Jets wide receiver, for me, it's going to be McCole Hardman. Just in that slot, he's got that deep capability as well. Seems like he's got early chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. He's been talked up in camp. So if I'm targeting a late wide receiver on the Jets, it's going to be McCole Hardman.
I love that. Moving on to Tyler Coklin. Any interest there from a tight end perspective?
For tight ends, if you can get 10 points a game, you're a top 10 tight end. I don't know if Conklin can do that on a consistent basis. He seems to be the clear-cut tight end one, and, I'll say clear-cut with a grain of salt for the Jets. He's catching touchdowns from Aaron Rodgers in practice, so a sight to be seen. I would consider him a late sleeper. I wouldn't draft him, but he's someone I will look on the waivers for.
Awesome. And then Michael Carter, any interest there or not really?
So I also did want to take a second and talk about the other Jets running backs on this team.
Yeah,
because if Dalvin Cook signs, then it's not even worth mentioning. Mm-hmm. But behind Breece Hall, you have Michael Carter, you have Zonovan Knight, and you have Izzy Abanikanda. And Izzy was one of my favorite guys going into the NFL draft. I'm not sure how I feel about this landing spot yet. Apparently, he's doing some good things in camp with the limited time that he's had. Of course, he's not playing with the first team. But, if Izzy gets a clear shot, like if they don't sign Dalvin Cook, and then Breece Hall is in a situation where he's not ready to start or he's injured, I think it's going to be Zonovan Knight or Izzy who are going to come in and take the most of the load. And Michael Carter is going to be kind of trapped in this passing down / supportive kind of role. I just think that's the kind of running back he is for this offense. I don't think Michael Carter is ever going to be in a situation where he is the guy on this team again. So if I'm drafting a running back late, again, assuming Dalvin Cook doesn't sign, I'll take a shot on Zonovan Knight. I'll take a shot on Izzy, assuming that either of those, both or either of those guys make the roster. Because if Zonovan Knight doesn't make the roster, and then Izzy does, I'll take Izzy, and then just the other way around. So that's kind of how I'm viewing this backfield. Carter kind of just feels like a waste of depth. Like, I'll hold him there. He's the Jets back. He might have a game where he gets like 2 or 3 catches, but he's never a guy I'm going to put in my starting lineup.
How about if Dalvin Cook signs with the Jets? Let's say we get news right now that Dalvin Cook has just signed with the Jets. Where does he go in your rankings? What round are you starting to take Dalvin Cook in? How are you thinking about him on the Jets?
That's something that I'm having trouble kind of digesting, because I think I'd have to look at the pay too. I'd have to look at
How
not
much
that
they
it's
give him?
gonna, yeah, like if they're
Yeah.
giving him 10 mil, then
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna put him higher than I'd probably like.
Mhm.
It'd probably end up being a third or fourth round pick, and I don't know what that even does to Breece at that point.
Yeah.
It becomes a whole situation. But I think the money is going to speak volumes here. I know he wants to go to a place that will give him the ball. Maybe that changes when you look at the Jets and Aaron Rodgers, and you're like, yeah, I could just get a championship potentially. But yeah, the money's going to talk in that scenario. If it's under 10, if it's 6 or 7 mil, then he'll probably end up being a later round guy. But we'll see. It's all up in the air right now.
And then what do you think about the strategy right now? If say you have your fantasy draft today, if you draft Breece Hall, are you actively trying to target Dalvin Cook as well as sort of like a handcuff, if you will, or is that not something you're thinking about?
No, no, because I think in that situation it's like you're getting two halves,
Yeah.
right? It's like you're getting two guys who, okay, if they're both playing, if they're both healthy, like which one's going to go off this week? It's kind of like a damned if I do, damned if I don't. Those two type of guys. I don't see it as like a handcuff situation. See it more of just a dog's being weird. I see it more of just a weird, like, I don't feel confident with this guy. I don't feel confident with this game. I'm not going to put myself in this decision every week of which guy I'm going to go for. So, and obviously, there's still a lot of training camp too. So, if Dalvin Cook comes in like now, and then
Hmm.
we have a month to kind of see like what's going on in practice, who's getting the first team reps. Maybe Breece is doing more pass catching. Maybe Dalvin Cook's being that goal line back. Like, we have to see how these roles are defined if that ends up being the case. We kind of take it from there.
Our last question on the Jets, and this is sort of more of an abstract question, so apologies for springing it on you. I know it wasn't in the show notes, but and it might be stupid, but as we watch Hard Knocks,
Sure.
is there anything that you're going to be looking at and putting like credence into in terms of how it formulates your fantasy opinions on these guys? Or are you just watching it purely for entertainment? Or are you going to like look and see like, oh, okay, like this happened in Hard Knocks. I'm now thinking about this player differently. Or how are you thinking through all that?
I'm closely watching Aaron Rodgers, and I'm closely watching who his best friends on the team end up being. Because we've seen Aaron Rodgers with Randall Cobb. He takes Randall Cobb everywhere he goes. He's still going to dump him off the ball as much as he can, even if he's 30 and not, playing up to his spot. So I think if Aaron Rodgers develops a really close chemistry, if I'm watching Hard Knocks and Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson are best friends, I'm excied.
What is
I'm
he going to
very
be?
excited.
Is he going to be the 101 for you then, Garrett Wilson?
Not 101.
He
I won't
can't
take
go
him
much
that high.
higher for you, dude.
Yeah. But again, I think that's, you can't take much from the show because I'm sure portions are scripted and so forth. But I think if I see clear chemistry between Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson, I'll be really excited because it kind of just confirms the trust. If you have that trust in a receiver with the quarterback, that creates value. So that's what I'll be looking at.
Awesome, man. Any last thoughts on the Jets before we move on?
I hope they don't make playoffs.
Me too. No, I'd be happy to see the Jets make the playoffs, man. They've been suffering for too long. And now it would just be so Jets if they didn't do anything now that they got Rodgers and they got some weapons. And
It'd be very Jets.
I hope it doesn't happen. Part of me wants to see the chaos and just the misery, but also I don't wish that upon my friends, but we'll see. That's why the NFL is the best reality show on earth. So we'll see how it plays out. Moving on to, I like to think they're the good guys of the New York metro area sports conglomerate, if you will, the Giants. Like, how can you not root for the Giants? It's Eli Manning. It's Tom Coughlin. It's
Two
maybe
Super
some
Bowls. That's exactly
two.
how I don't root for them.
respect. Yeah. You got your fair share. I don't want to hear it. Giants, super interesting team this year, man. I mean, like we know what happened before with all of the dysfunction that was on offense with Joe Judge and all those guys, but now it seems like things have really turned a corner here with Brian Daboll. They have one of these new age head coaches that really can kind of change the game on offense, like an Andy Reid type, like a Nick Sirianni type, or Shane Steichen potentially.
Absolutely.
So I think the Giants are super interesting, and that's as objective as I can be about it. I want to hear your take on the Giants just as a whole, as a team. Like, are you expecting big things from them this year? I know last year was sort of a surprise. Are you expecting them to make the playoffs again, or what are you expecting out of the Giants this year?
So I'm expecting a better year. I'm expecting a similar year to last year, if not better, because right now, if you look at the NFC, who are the top 3 quarterbacks in the NFC?
I
Like,
think,
if you had like, it's not easy to think about right now. No
yeah,
more Aaron Rodgers.
yeah,
You got Kirk Cousins,
hurts.
Dak, yeah, Jalen Hurts, Dak, if you even want to consider him there. And then you look at like the West, you got like Kyler Murray's coming off an injury. I don't really know how I feel about that. There's not a lot of great competition.
Gino,
Geno, yeah, for sure.
yeah,
But like, how bad is it that I mean, Geno
yeah,
played great last year, but we're talking Geno
yeah.
Smith, Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback in this conference. So
Hurts is
it's
really the only guy where you look at him and you're like, he's him.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
it. And there's a
yeah,
ton of guys in the AFC. You got Mahomes, Herbert, so forth. So when you look at the NFC, there's not a lot of competition. I think the Giants are in a position where they're going to be a top 4 seed.
wow,
Um, that doesn't mean that they'll win the Super Bowl. That doesn't mean that they're a dominant team. I think it just means that they're an above average team, and I think they're going to take their wild card appearance. It was a wild card, right? They were a wild card last year.
hmm
So, and I think they'll turn that into a like a number 3 or number 4 seed, a confident number 3, number 4 seed. But I'm not expecting Super Bowl run. But and then again,
no,
there's a lot of situations where nobody's expecting Super Bowl runs from this team, and then they end up making it work. Like last year, I don't think that the Chiefs, obviously they're the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes. You never count them out. But I don't think there were anyone's like true number
yeah,
1 going
hmm
into the playoffs last year. You had no clear wide receiver 1. You got a situation where like what's going on with the defense? Mahomes hurt here and there, and so uh, but yeah, I mean, again, I think the Giants can be in for a good year for sure.
Not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but that's a great point you bring up, Joe. I like last year at this time, people were saying like, oh, I mean, look at the Denver Broncos. They have Russell Wilson.
Yeah,
The Chiefs are not going to repeat as AFC West champions. Look at the fucking what's their name? The Las Vegas Raiders. They have, Devontae Adams now, blah blah blah. No, it's still the Chiefs. Like we have all these conceptions in our head about how things might change and whatnot, but like we don't know. And so
yep,
I think that's a really great point that you're making, Joe. Like we don't know yet.
yeah.
So
Chiefs lost
don't
Tyreek Hill, and that was the kind of big
right.
thing for them. So
Yeah, and everyone freaked out. So like let's just not get too attached to preconceived notions of what we think these teams are going to be. So, okay, rant over, tangent over. Saquon Barkley. Let's get back to our draft or pass portion of the show here. Saquon Barkley currently going in round 1, Joe. Drafting or you passing on Saquon Barkley?
easy draft. I think he kind of showed last year that he's going to come back. He's going to come back strong. He's going to come back healthy. He's only healthier now. He just signed a contract. So I think of the Giants. If I'm the Giants, the situation with the running backs, I'm going to squeeze every ounce I can out of
Yeah,
Saquon Barkley this year.
yeah.
$11 million or $10 million guaranteed. He's not going to be back with the team next year because this team showed that they're not willing to give him a long-term extension. So I'm going to squeeze all the juice out that I can from Saquon Barkley. Don't save that as a soundbite. Um, but yeah, like again, I talked about the wide. I can't get past that. It was like in my brain, I knew I wanted to say that, but I knew it was just going to be so bad.
That's hilarious.
But the early wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, those guys being taken in the top 5, which generation like typically it's running backs being taken in the top 5, but if those wide receivers being taken early, it's going to push guys like Saquon Barkley to the middle or if not end of the first round. I've seen situations where some people have Bijan over him, some people have Josh Jacobs, varying on his situation, might be drafted over Saquon. There's a couple other guys as well, obviously Eckler and CMC, but situations where Saquon Barkley drops to the second round. So Giants are going to squeeze all the juice, and I think it's very much worth that first round pick.
I love it. Where in your sort of combined ranks do you have him? Like, do you have him above those elite wide receivers, or do you have him behind there? Where does he slide in your overall rankings for you?
So there's a combination of Eckler, CMC, and then those first 3 wide receivers being
Okay.
Chase, Jefferson, Kupp, and then
Mhm.
it kind of goes into Saquon Barkley / Travis Kelce.
Okay.
Still don't have a definite but somewhere around 6, 7, 8 is probably where I'd have Saquon Barkley in terms of that first round pick.
Okay. That's great, man. Appreciate that info. Let's move on to his running mate, as you might call him, Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes. Looking at him
Yes.
in round 11, are you drafting or are you passing on Daniel Jones in round 11?
So I think what's really interesting about Daniel Jones last year is he was QB9 last year. And we're kind of talking about him like he's the same old Daniel Jones. He did get some additions. I mean, Darren Waller is going to be great for this team if he can stay healthy. They added about 8 slot wide receivers, so he'll have no problem throwing it to that position on the field. But he was the quarterback 9 last year. And when you look at games 10 through 17, Daniel Jones was the quarterback 4 in that span. I mean, he had games of 36, 21, 19, 26. So he really started the pile. And that was kind of playing into the Giants as a whole, getting better as a team, and that being reflected in Daniel Jones' fantasy performance. So if we're continuing to see that this team is going to improve, as we assume that they are, as he's got Darren Waller, as he's got a healthy, paid Saquon Barkley, as he's got some weapons finally. I mean, look at who were the wide receivers for Daniel Jones last year.
Richie James and Isaiah Hodgins.
Isaiah Hodgins came out of nowhere and saved this team towards the end of the year. Like, the fact that he did it with absolutely no one is also pretty mind-boggling too. So yeah, 100%. I think Daniel Jones is someone I'm drafting. I talked about quarterback purgatory before with like Aaron Rodgers in the 10th round, but I would put Daniel Jones, at the tail end of that like high quarterback tier. So
okay.
Right before Aaron Rodgers, I'd put Daniel Jones. I'd consider him in that tier of like after Trevor Lawrence, after those guys. All right, I consider Daniel Jones. He's got high upside. And then I'll go into that purgatory of Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins. And then it kind of ends up with guys like Anthony Richardson that are really high upside, but also really late in the draft. So yeah, Daniel Jones, 100% someone I'm drafting. And his ADP is after Aaron Rodgers. So makes all the sense for me. It may not seem pretty to a lot of people, and that's okay. You just have to roll with it. Because again, a quarterback in round 11, you could replace him in the first week if you wanted to with Anthony Richardson. So,
yeah, and Jones has that upside with the rushing ability that somebody like Rodgers doesn't have or somebody like Cousins doesn't have. And so, to your point, dude, like you pick him up, you draft him, you see how it's rolling early on in the year, and then if you have to make a trade for another quarterback because it's so horrendous, then you can do that. You can pick up Kenny Pickett off the waiver wire, but that upside is there in ways that it's not for other players. And so I'm glad that you brought that up because it's the cheat code now, right? The quarterback that can rush is the cheat code. And Daniel Jones is quietly one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the NFL. Like he's not Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields, obviously. He's not Anthony Richardson, but he's pretty damn good. He can run the football, man. And he's a big guy. He's not afraid to lower the shoulder. So he's going to get those goal line touchdowns. He's going to break out that 20-yard scramble all of a sudden out of nowhere. And so I love that you're in on Daniel Jones, man. How about for him as a quarterback for the Giants? Like, do you not trying to go too deep on this, but like, do you think he's the quarterback of the future? Or?
I think he is. I think he's kind of proved that he can make it work with what he's got, which I think is a really key component for any quarterback. Like if you can just kind of take him to the playoffs with Isaiah Hodgins and Richie James. I mean, look at the Stephon Diggs effect is what we're going to keep calling it. The A.J. Brown effect of Jalen Hurts. Is he the guy? I don't know. Give him A.J. Brown. Oh, look, he's in the Super Bowl. Josh Allen. Accuracy issues. Is he really his team's franchise quarterback? Stephon Diggs. Oh, look, he's the best quarterback in the league. Like, it's a situation where I think, let's say Giants somehow get their hands on a stud wide receiver like that. I mean, Tua and Tyreek, maybe that's going to be the next new thing. But point being, give this guy a freaking weapon and then watch what happens. That's all I can really say about that. That's all it's going to take. Get him an elite wide receiver. See what happens.
Well, somebody who might pose as an elite wide receiver that my boy Joe Shane hooked it up with, Darren Waller. Coming over. I mean, super interesting player this year. Definitely one of like the inflection points there and like, the middle of the draft where you're looking at maybe staring at a guy like Alvin Kamara, or you could take Darren Waller. Darren Waller's currently going in the 6th round. Are you drafting or are you passing on Darren Waller at his current ADP?
So I mentioned quarterback purgatory, and I'm going to tell you something about tight end purgatory because we got the guys like TJ Hawkinson, you got George Kittle, you got Mark Andrews, you got Travis Kelce, and then you kind of have this middle area of like Darren Waller, if he stays healthy, he could be in that category. Otherwise, there's a chance he just doesn't, even if he is healthy. So it's kind of like a weird. Now you're losing value if you take Darren Waller over someone else in that 6th round. Like you mentioned, Alvin Kamara, wild that he's being drafted in the 6th round. But Darren Waller fits perfectly in that tight end purgatory spot. I'm always a believer of taking a higher end tight end. I don't like taking risks with tight ends because a lot of times you end up like, all right, this week, who do I have to pick up? It's like, I really have to start this guy this week. Like
Cole Kmet.
I got to start Cole Kmet this week. He's going to get maybe 3 points. He might get 10 if I get lucky. Or you get a guy like Mark Andrews, who, if he's healthy and on the field, he's getting you 15, 20 points. And that's like a 10-point advantage every single week against whatever team you're going against, assuming they don't have a Mark Andrews or whatever. So I'm a component of taking a tight end early. I'm a component of getting good value at the tight end position. I just don't think Darren Waller in the 6th round is good value. I think it's possible that Darren Waller, again, he ends up being the go-to guy for Daniel Jones. He's going to have his big games as he does, but he's also dealing with a lot of injuries. So you get Darren Waller and he gets hurt, you wasted a 6th round pick, and then you're kind of in purgatory. You're in hell again, trying to get a backup tight end, and you're just kind of getting this weekly thing, but except you don't have that 6th round pick to support it. Obviously, you can make that argument with any player in fantasy football if they get injured, but I think specifically for the tight end position, I just don't want to take that risk. So I'm going to pass on Darren Waller in the 6th round. I think he's easily going to be a top 10 tight end if he's on the field, because, again, you need 10 points a game. That's it, to be a top 10 tight end in this league. I think he can easily do that. It's just a matter of, am I going to take him there, or do I want Jelani Woods in the 14th round, who could be the same? I'm very high in Jelani Woods, by the way. Kind of a weird thing, but
not weird. I took him in the fishbowl because you're on it. And my boy who I was drafting with was like, why Jelani Woods? And I said, because Joe likes him. I don't know. So no, I said, look, I mean, he could be the number 2 option in that offense, and not to turn this into the Jelani Woods hour, but he could be the number 2 option in that offense. He has a great athletic profile. He went to Virginia, right? So he's got to be a sharp kid. I like Jelani Woods too, but for Darren Waller, it is the health. That's the big question mark. And so if he can stay healthy, Joe, are you going to be upset that you didn't draft him because he's going to have a big year, or like kind of? You don't think, even if he stays healthy, you don't think that this offense is going to be able to provide enough volume in the passing game for Waller, or how are you thinking through that?
Well, another thing too is, I'm sure we'll talk about it in a second, but this team has about 800 slot wide receivers, and that's where Darren Waller likes to play a lot too. Not that, he's not better than any of those other slot receivers that they have, but when it just comes to like divvying up that kind of volume, there's going to be times where Darren Waller gets it, maybe Jalin Hyatt gets it, maybe Sterling Shepard comes back from the dead and he gets it. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. And again, I don't think it's necessarily a competition for targets for Darren Waller. It's just about staying healthy. It's just about staying consistent and changing teams, getting older. He is an older tight end too. So there's a ton of factors, but no, I won't be upset if I miss out, because I know he's going to be a top 10, and I'll have guys like Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce. So I'll be fine.
So just to clarify, you have Darren Waller below guys like Evan Ingram, below guys like Dallas Goedert, Kyle Pitts. He's below all those guys for you.
So I would kind of put Dallas Goedert almost kind of fits into that purgatory. I think Dallas Goedert is pretty good. I have Evan Ingram over Darren Waller though.
Okay. I think that's a super respectable take to have. I like Darren Waller, but that might be the Homer fan side of me coming out.
Nothing wrong with that.
I just haven't seen a good tight end for the Giants, Shockey, and that was really good. So I'm trying to see that come back into my life. But let's talk about, you mentioned we now have about 800 slot receivers. It's going to be super interesting to see which ones make the team, because not everybody can make the team, of course. Instead of talking about all of them, I wanted to first highlight Jalin Hyatt, because he was taken in the draft, and the Giants supposedly did like him quite a bit. They were talking about taking him in the 2nd round, but ultimately they went with the center out of Minnesota. But they had a 2nd round grade on him. So Are you excited about Jalin Hyatt currently going in the 14th round? Are you drafting or are you passing on him at that current ADP?
See, like, I don't know if I'm passing on anyone in the 14th round.
Mhm.
Just as like a general rule of thumb, if a guy has upside, why not? At that point in the draft. The only thing I'm concerned about with a guy like Jalin Hyatt is where he's gonna kind of play into this offense. I mentioned that Darren Waller basically owns the slot.
Yep.
And again, good friend. I don't know, good friend. He's definitely a friend though. Jalin Hyatt lined up in the slot on 89.2% of his sample snaps. And he was off the line for 91.1%. So he's very much used to playing in that slot position on the field. But what's also interesting is he has a lot of success on the 9 route, which is essentially just a go route straight down the field. He's a bigger guy, which is what this team is also lacking. So it's going to be interesting of like, okay, you have Jalin Hyatt. Are you going to try to force him into the slot with all these other guys? Or are you going to let him line up in the perimeter and just shoot some go routes and see what he can do? Kind of let him be that wide receiver for this team, stretch the field type guy. He's got a lot of speed. I think I saw in practice he recorded like 24 miles per hour or something like that, which is
I've never done that.
true.
I've never done that.
I haven't either. I'm yet to hit like 14 or 15 probably, but no, but I mean 24 miles per hour.
That's really fast. That's really fast.
He's tall. He had a 73.3% success rate running that 9 route in college as well. So he's got the deep playability. It's just a matter of where are they going to play him? Because again, he played in the slot 90% of his career. So it's tough. I mean, there's other guys on this team at wide receiver that I'm alluding to that I like better to take late. Like if there's between him and some of the other guys in the Giants wide receivers, I will take other guys before him. But I'm not against it at all. I'm not against it. Rookies, whenever you get late into the draft and you're like, I don't know who to pick rookies because their upside is undetermined. Their upside is higher because we haven't seen them play. So that's what I would say.
I think that's a really good take. And the one thing I'll add to that is Jalin Hyatt's success running the 9 route. Very good, I think. But the problem is that Daniel Jones hasn't really shown an aptitude for throwing the deep ball. And so I'm not.
Yeah, throw the 9 route.
Right. And so I'm not sure how, productive Hyatt's going to be given that. And so we'll see. I mean, it's one of those things where, I don't know. I'm just not buying into it yet. But like you said, we don't know what the upside is. They liked him enough to have a second round grade on him. So we'll see. But let's move on to some of the other guys. Like I know you were mentioning you're pretty excited about one or two of these dudes. So who are you most excited about? Who's going to be that one wide receiver that we look at, this year for fantasy and be like, man, I wish I drafted player X from the Giants because he was able to give me a weekly productive stat line that I could bank on week in and week out. Who is it for you?
So he's not only a player that I'm really excited about, but he's also a player who I have as one of my sleepers for this year, and that's Isaiah Hodgins. So Isaiah Hodgins last year kind of came onto the scene. I think he was on the Bills practice squad. And again, Matt Harmon, the go-to guy. This sounds like a Matt Harmon podcast, but it's got a lot of good stuff.
Dude, I mean, not for nothing. Harmon's like when I look at fantasy analysts, I look at guys and girls that are putting in the work, Harmon's one of those guys that puts in the work big time, man.
Yeah.
There's in my opinion, and not to go off too much, but like there's two types of people in the fantasy content game. There's the people who are trying to be entertainers like me. Like I'm not trying to pose as one of these guys that comes in and, I'm not grinding too much film. I'm not diving into the numbers. But you are one of those guys. Like you were diving into the numbers, you were grinding film. Harmon's one of those guys too. So like, we listen to Matt Harmon on this show. We listen to you on this show. So I just want to kind of put that out there.
Yeah, for sure. And, we also listen to Isaiah Hodgins because he lined up on the perimeter. This is huge. He lined up on the perimeter on 83.4% of his snaps last year with the Giants, which, again, we're talking about all the slot wide receivers that this team has. I mean, what perimeter receivers do they have? If Jalin Hyatt doesn't play on the perimeter, then it's Hodgins and who? Darius Slayton? Like I'm throwing at Isaiah Hodgins 10 out of 10 times if that's the case. But 83.4% of his sample snaps, he was playing on the perimeter. He lined up as the X receiver quite often. He has great separation. And at the same time, he's really good at contested catches. He brought down 6 of the 7 contested catches that he had last year. So I think you look at a situation where in the 13th, 14th round, you want a typical X receiver for a team. I know Isaiah Hodgins kind of just broke out into the scene last year, but he was consistent when he actually did get on the field as well. So look, it's going to be a situation where I'm looking, and I'm trying to pull it up now. But Isaiah Hodgins last year, so he had games of 10, 11, 14, 10. Nothing too important, but I think what's really interesting. Oh wait, that was in standard. I'm sorry.
There you go.
And that was in standard. So in PPR, okay, so now it's better. 15, 16, 22, 14, and that's just the end off the year when he really started getting going. They obviously have Darren Waller, they have all these slot guys, but there's going to be a situation where you need a chain mover, and that's Isaiah Hodgins on this team. So he's the wide receiver I want. He's a wide receiver I'm going to target on this team. He's a sleeper. If he can give you weekly flex value, which I believe he could, that's a steal for the 14th, potentially undrafted Isaiah Hodgins.
Yeah, and he's the guy that they brought over from Buffalo too. So Joe Shane and Brian Dable had him in Buffalo. They know what they got in him. There's a rapport there. So I'm pretty excited personally about Isaiah Hodgins this year as well. Let me ask you about Wandale real quick, just because he's kind of like the name that a lot of people know, just based on his draft capital from a couple years ago. So are you feeling it, Wandale Robinson at all this year? Yeah.
Again, it comes to that messy, and I just want to preface by saying, just because I keep saying there's so many players in the slot for the Giants, that doesn't mean that you should target none of them, right? Mm-hmm. Because I feel like that's the impression I'm kind of giving of like, why would you do that? Because there's this guy, there's this guy, there's this guy. If I had to pick one guy in that position, it'd probably be Paris Campbell. I think Paris Campbell started to show out a little bit last year in Indy, a little, too little, too late, sure. But at the same time, it seems like he's doing really good in training camp so far. He's getting that rapport. If he ends up being the starting guy in the slot, that's probably who I would prefer. I don't think Wandale was anything special last year. He also dealt with it. Just kind of felt like they carbon copied Sterling Shepard and just like threw him out there and was like, oh, look, he's injured again. So again, I'm not overly excited about Wandale Robinson. I think he's a guy who, for me, is kind of falling down that list a little bit. The 3 wide receivers I'll look at: number 1, Isaiah Hodgins; number 2, Jalin Hyatt for that rookie upside; and number 3, Paris Campbell, just as a guy who really kind of started to put it together last year. He's a veteran at this point, and I think he could slot in pretty well into that offense.
I love it, man. Any other things that you want to touch on with regards to the Giants before we wrap up?
I mean, we do want to look at what's potentially behind Saquon Barkley. In case he does go down, because again, he has been injured in the past, and maybe to kind of look forward as well, because if the Giants don't have Saquon Barkley next year, what's going to be behind him? So I think they have Matt Breida, James Robinson, and then a rookie, Eric Gray. I think Eric Gray is someone who I'm definitely looking at. I'm not necessarily drafting him as a handcuff to Saquon Barkley. I'd imagine James Robinson does not make the final roster, as he has an issue making final rosters as of recently. Getting booted off teams like the Patriots, the Jets, and things like that. So if I'm taking a guy behind Saquon, it's going to be Eric Gray. Again, rookie upside. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, he had 6.4 yards per carry last year in college. Pretty good. The James Robinson thing, I think it's just unfortunate circumstance of injuries. And Matt Breida, we'll see. Matt Breida. Yeah. All right, dude. Well, I think we did it. I think we just covered the 2 New York Metropolitan football teams, even though they play in New Jersey. We won't get into all that right now.
Don't remind me as a Jersey guy.
Joe, I appreciate you coming on, man. This was awesome. Yeah, like I said, you're one of the people in the industry that I respect the most. When we first started doing our stuff on Instagram, I showed everybody your page. I was like, guys, this is what we need to become. And so to be podcasting with you now and to be collabing is pretty cool for me personally. And so I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate all the love you've shown, and excited to link up in Canton here in a couple of days at the Fantasy Football Expo.
Yeah, absolutely. Next week. Can't believe it's already coming up that quick. Oh God, I gotta start packing or getting my crap together, I guess. But yeah, absolutely. We'll hang out. We'll have a good time. We gotta do. Maybe we can record a podcast there. Whatever whatever works. We'll talk about
Little
it
live
after.
podcast, that'd be
A
cool.
little live podcast actually in the middle of a crowded bar on a Friday. That'd be interesting.
But that might have legs. Yeah, we might have to pull the thread on that a little bit. Cool. All right, dude. Well, let's wrap up. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Go ahead and follow Joe. Follow his page on Instagram at fantasy.football.analyst. He's putting out great stuff always. And if you would be so kind as to please subscribe to our YouTube channel, it really helps us out. But more importantly, leave a comment on the video. Let us know what you thought about it. Let us know if you thought it was good. Let us know if you thought it was horrible. If there's something specific that you'd like us to talk about, let us know. That give us feedback. That's the number one thing you can do for our channel right now. So really appreciate you guys tuning in. Really appreciate you again, Joe, for being with us. That'll do it for this episode of the Better Fantasy Football Show. We'll see you next time.
See you.
All right, cool.